watching TV at election time. Well, there was two candidates trying to lay it on the line. One of them looked like he was training to be cute. He was a white man in a business suit. Looked at the other, he was equally astute. He was a white man in a business suit. Well, they kept on talking, they didn't make sense. They both seemed to be on the same side of the fence. There was no debate, it was a phony dispute. They were just two white men in business suits. You wanna be the president, you gotta learn to salute and be a white man in a business suit. It was a white man in a business suit. Well, every single one of them is in cahoots.
We can start. I'd like to welcome, in the name of Tiny Press Agency and Tiny Press Center, our today guests, members of an American delegation, Mrs. Milintievich from Ministry of Information, and all present fellow journalists, foreign and Yugoslav. I will say a couple of words of Mr. Beru Tucci and Mr. Michael Parenti, who heads delegation. Beru Tucci is a lecturer in modern European history at the Kingsborough Community College in the City University of New York, and the founder and director of the Jasenovac Research Institute, the non-government organization sponsoring this delegation. He was the organizer of the first international exhibition and conference of the Jasenovac concentration camps in New York in 1997. He has written widely on the situation in Yugoslavia and is a frequent commentator on American radio stations. And Dr. Michael Parenti is a progressive author and lecturer who has written about US foreign policy and US politics from a critical perspective. He is the author of 14 books and over 200 articles and lectures widely in the United States and Canada before peace groups, community groups, and at universities.
Excited to have this opportunity to welcome my fellow Americans, as I call them, our soldiers, because in America, like here, when the American aggression took place against Yugoslavia, against the Serbian people, we developed a front in the United States because the United States was the aggressor and led that aggression with the NATO countries. And these are our soldiers. We have the front lines there, and they have been with us fighting for our truth, fighting for our right to exist and to govern ourselves, to be in charge of our own home and our own house. They're a wonderful group of people. They come from different walks of life. They live in different parts of the United States, and everywhere they have organized and joined with other forces who opposed American aggression against Yugoslavia. They come here sponsored by an organization, an institution called the Jasenovac Research Institute, which has been functioning and doing quite a bit of work concerning Jasenovac and the Holocaust, which took place during World War II. They all belong to one broadly conceived organization, which is called North American Solidarity with Yugoslavia. And they come here as a delegation of that umbrella organization. They came here for 2 weeks. And in the course of those 2 weeks, they hope to be able to meet as many people and see as much as they need to get better prepared with facts in order to come back to the United States and continue the fight which they have been leading until now. They work on different fronts. They are interested in some of them are interested in the Hague process against this aggression. Others are interested what chemicals have been used to kill the people here in the NATO bombing. Still others are interested how much economic damage was done to the country, and so on. So their fact-finding mission here is, this is the purpose of their mission here, to find the facts, to arm themselves and go back to continue the fight. So in this sense, and for that purpose, I'm delighted to greet them and welcome them here. Barry is a good friend of mine. We teach at the same university. We've known each other for a number of years and have been fighting the same battles and the same fights for these good many years. And in this sense and for that purpose, I welcome them, and I hope that you will be able to give them the coverage they deserve, because unless you know that they're here, they're not here. So the media in these kinds of situations is very important. The Ministry of the Foreign Ministry of Yugoslavia is preparing their itinerary, and they started this morning, early in the morning. This is the third session they've had so far, even though they arrived only last night. They're going to continue this pace together as much as possible and then go on. So welcome, and Barry, please.
Thank you, Rada. Thank you. Thank you very much for being here today. It seems hard to believe that there's anyone left who still believes that Yugoslavia could have been destroyed by ancient ethnic hatreds.
Teško je da postoji još uvijek neko ko može da veruje da je Jugoslaviju uništila današnja mržnja.
And not by the deliberate policies of the United States and its Western allies.
Politika Sjedinjenih država
And its Western allies.
I njihovih zapadnih saveznika.
We know that the potency of that lie, the big lie that Yugoslavia was destroyed by ancient ethnic hatreds,
Znamo da je ta laž, moć te laži, da je Jugoslavija uništena
Etničkom mržnjom.
was greatly diminished by the reality of 20,000 tons of bombs being dropped on Yugoslavia over 78 days.
Znatno je smanjena snagom 20.000 bombi koje su bačene.
But unfortunately, the big lie technique served its purpose in providing the necessary diversion for the White House, the Pentagon, and the State Department to destroy Yugoslavia, a country respected around the world for multinational unity. When investigating a crime such as this, one needs to learn both the motive and the modus operandi.
Istraživajući motive, treba znati korene.
Some of the best evidence for this was in the Rambouillet Agreement itself.
Jedan od najvećih dokaza je sporazum Rambouillet.
But the modus operandi follows a pattern that should be very familiar today. Incite ethnic conflict.
Ali motivi su veoma poznati danas u okviru etničkog sukoba.
By supporting secessionist movements.
Podržavajući secesionistički pokret.
Invent also a new fake history.
Izmišljajući takođe novu lažnu istoriju.
To justify this secessionist movement.
Da bi se ovaj secesionizam opravdao.
Finance covertly and arm these secessionists, often using the narcotics trade to support it, exaggerate and misrepresent the suppression of that rebellion as human rights violations, and then disseminate cooked up stories or fake stories of atrocities to the human rights organizations and Jewish organizations as well, and then threaten war to defend human rights. This is a modus operandi, a pattern that fits not only Yugoslavia, but is the model for all future wars.
Ovo je obrazac, model, ne samo koji je poslužio zgodno ne samo u Jugoslaviji, nego i za sve buduće ratove.
And it is therefore a threat not simply to the people of the Balkans, but to all of humanity.
I stoga ne preti samo narodu Balkana, već i čitavom čovječanstvu.
Because if the next victim of this kind of crime is a country such as China, we may be facing
bude zemlja kao što je Kina,
we may be facing a world war.
možda ćemo se suočiti sa svetskim ratom.
This delegation that we are bringing here for this month
Delegacija sa kojom ste došli ovoga meseca
has a threefold purpose.
ima tri cilja.
First of all, to bring humanitarian aid.
Prvo da se donese humanitarna pomoć, dopremi.
Secondly, to offer assistance to any organization or individual who needs help in terms of volunteer labor.
Drugo, da se ponudi pomoć svim organizacijama u vidu dobrovoljnog rada koji su zainteresovani za to.
But finally, above all, to collect the evidence of NATO war crimes and to submit that evidence, first of all, to the commission established by Ramsey Clark.
Ali najzad i pre svega da se prikupe dokazi koji će se podneti komisiji koju je formirao Ramsey Clark.
But as Radmila correctly put, to disseminate that around the world to other peace activists and to the media as well and to scholars to get at the truth about what happened in Yugoslavia.
I da bi se potom ti dokazi distribuirali, preneli svim ostalim zainteresovanima, naročito medijima u svetu.
As the leader of this delegation, I can say that I can speak for all of us by saying that we unequivocally condemn the aggression committed by NATO.
Kao vođa ove delegacije mogu da kažem da mi bezuslovno i nedvosmisleno osuđujemo
and we view it as the moral obligation of Americans and citizens of all NATO countries to stand up and try to do something to help the victims of this aggression. And while the humanitarian aid that we brought was small, we believe it was a necessary gesture at this time to set a standard or model for others to follow around the world, and not just in the United States, but we hope in Europe and other countries from around the world. When we established the Jasenovac Research Institute, we founded it on the belief that the crimes of genocide committed in World War II were at the very core of the current destruction of Yugoslavia. And for that reason, we established a human rights NGO and research institute that could independently draw the connections between what happened in World War II and the policy of the United States in supporting fascist secessionist movements such as the KLA.
Bi mogla da uspostavi, da pronađe vezu između onoga što se događalo za vreme Drugog svjetskog rata i onoga što se događa sada.
Indeed, many of the same families as you citizens of Yugoslavia know all too well were involved in the Holocaust in World War II in Yugoslavia, and were again involved in the destruction of Yugoslavia and in the Kosovo, KLA.
I za vreme Drugog svjetskog rata u Holokaustu, a i sada na Kosovu.
I u razaranju Jugoslavije.
This connection, this is why this connection must be disseminated. The evidence must be collected, and it must be brought to a world attention.
I upravo se na ovu povezanost mora skrenuti pažnja svetske javnosti.
We know all about the sites. We know exactly the information about what was bombed, and we know exactly what we want to see. What is important is that we collect video. We have a camera crew, and we'll collect both video evidence, but also testimonies of people who suffered damages.
Mi tačno znamo koja su mesta bombardovana, a kako imamo videokameru, snimit ćemo to i što je još važnije, snimit ćemo svedočenja ljudi koji su to doživjeli.
And we believe that if we collect the testimonies of people who suffered damages, that even though we may not receive justice in the near future, that at some point in the future, reparations must be paid for every crime committed, for every piece of property lost, for every life lost, for every car, hospital, bridge, school destroyed, that in the future, reparations and justice must come about. But
Iako ne verujemo da će u neposrednoj budućnosti ta svedočenja uroditi plodom u vidu reparacije, u izvesnom trenutku u budućnosti sigurni smo da će reparacije morati da se plati za svaki oštećeni most, za svaki oštećeni objekat, za kola, za apsolutno sve što je ušteno, za živote.
But that can't happen until the first step is taken, and that is the collection and the serious effort of collecting that kind of evidence and the testimonies of those who lost, who were victimized by this aggression.
I zato je najvažnije da se u ovoj prvoj fazi prikupe ti dokazi o ljudima koji su bili žrtve ove agresije.
And in that sense, we must do better than was done after Jasenovac.
U tom smislu moramo se bolje pokazati nego u slučaju Jasenovca.
Because the victims of Jasenovac have still not received justice.
Jer žrtve iz Jasenovca još uvijek nisu dobile svoj pravdu.
And we must bear that in mind when we proceed with this investigation.
To moramo imati na umu kada pristupamo ovoj istrazi.
So I won't make any further statement at this point, but I would like to just say a few words about some of the members of our delegation.
Ne bih dalje govorio o tome, želio bih da predstavim članove delegacije.
As I mentioned, we have a camera crew, and we also have a researcher of military, of the use of illegal military weapons, Ms. Patricia Axelrod, who is in the back.
Imamo znači kamermane su poveli sa sobom kao i stručnjaka za istraživanja nelegalne prodaje oružja.
We have a well-known journalist by the name of Gregory Ilić, who is here. We have also a representative from the Puerto Rican and Latino community, Mr. Mendieta, who is in the front row. We have a representative from the Serbian Jewish Friendship Society in the United States, Ms. Dunayer. We have a representative of a peace organization in Texas, Mr. Ken Freeland. We have an architect who is interested in trying to provide some help for refugee camps in Yugoslavia, Mr. Jeffrey Goldberg. Yes, we have also a representative from a student organization in the City University of New York, Mr. Ayman El Said.
Ayman je također član delegacije, predstavnik studentske organizacije u New Yorku, Ayman El Said.
And am I leaving? Oh, I'm leaving out my friend Michael Parenti, who has already been introduced. And so I guess that, have I left anyone? Joe Friend. Well, we have a two-member camera crew, producers of videos. But anyway, without further ado, I'll turn it over to my colleague Michael Parenti. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to point out I've been a critic of U.S. foreign policy for quite some time.
Želim da istaknem da sam kritičar zvanične američke politike već izvesno vreme.
And one thing, there are a number of kinds of criticisms of U.S. policy in the United States.
Ima brojnih kritika američke politike u samim Sjedinjenim državama.
There are some reactionaries who complain that U.S. policy is faint-hearted and it's not strong or decisive enough, even when it's destroying countries with bombs.
Tu su određeni reakcionarni krugovi koji smatraju da američka spoljna politika nije dovoljno žestoka.
There are others who complain that when they disapprove of a particular action,
Potom drugi koji ne odobravaju određene akcije.
that U.S. policy is foolish and confused.
Koji tvrde da je američka politika luda i zbrkana.
They believe they're smarter than the U.S. policymakers
I smatraju da su pametniji od onih koji kreiraju američku politiku.
because they don't know what U.S. leaders are doing. They think U.S. leaders don't know what they're doing.
Jer oni smatraju da američki lideri zapravo ne znaju šta rade.
But U.S. policy has been remarkably consistent. The goal is to overthrow any progressive government that exists or any independent government that
Ali
exists.
američka politika je itekako dosledna i njen je cilj da uništi svaku progresivnu vladu u svetu.
The goal is to third worldize other countries, to turn them into a third world nation. I call it the third worldization of the world.
Cilj je američke politike da te progresivne vlade gurnu u tabor zemalja trećeg sveta.
And this consists of privatizing its industries and then eventually deindustrializing whatever industry it might have,
Ovo se odnosi se na privatizaciju industrije,
which has been done through all of Eastern Europe and Latin America and places.
koja se sprovodi u Evropi i u Latinskoj Americi naročito.
Take over its land, its markets, and its natural resources,
Preuzimanje zemlje i prirodnih resursa, tržišta,
either through neo-imperialism, the IMF, having your own representatives in government, or through direct colonization we see coming back with NATO reverting now to a kind of 19th century direct military occupation and colonization.
Znači bilo preko posredstvom neoimperialističkih organizacija kakva je MMF, bilo putem direktne intervencije vojne, kao u ovom slučaju.
Another goal is to monopolize its media,
Drugi cilj je da se monopolišu mediji,
so that all the media throughout the world will just reflect the views of global capitalism.
Svi mediji odražavaju i izražavaju stavove globalnog kapitalizma.
And the other goal is to impoverish its public sector, impoverish public transportation, public medicine, public education, impoverish these things, weaken them, minimize them.
A sledeći cilj je da se osiromaši državni sektor i da se svede na minimum.
And to impoverish its workforce so that people will be hungry and willing to work harder for less and less.
I da se osiromaši radnička klasa koja će biti spremna da radi za sve manji iznos.
It's a very rational and consistent policy. There's nothing foolish or confused about it.
I zato je to veoma racionalna i dosledna politika i u njoj nema ničeg ni ludog, ni izbrkanog.
And there are those of us who oppose it and hate it with all our hearts because of the injustice that it represents.
I ima zato puno nas koji se suprotstavljamo njoj, ne odobravamo je.
I would like to point out it's also the goal of the U.S. ruling class to do the same thing to the United States itself. That same process is going on in the United States.
Cilj je također da se ovaj isti proces prenese i u Sjedinjene države i da se isto to uradi sa tamošnjim narodom.
Our steel industry, our industries have been deindustrialized as they're exported off to cheaper labor markets in the third world.
Naša industrija čelika se također...
I must be saying the wrong thing for some stations. Huh? They're pulling away their cameras.
Za neku stanicu.
And they're cutting back on public health services and public sector things in the U.S. also.
Državno zdravstvo, znači državni zdravstveni sektor, biblioteke, prosvetu.
At the same time, I should like to point out, and many people sometimes outside the United States doesn't know this, these policies do not have 100% support among the American people. There are large sectors of the American public that oppose and resist. You don't hear about them too much because the corporate media don't publicize it.
Ono što se možda ne zna, to je da ima jako mnogo ljudi u samim Sjedinjenim državama koji su protiv ovoga, ali nažalost ta istina ne dospeva do njih zato što medijske korporacije to sprečavaju.
And I even like to think that we had some effect during this terrible war against the people of Yugoslavia.
A to se isto radi kada je reč o Jugoslaviji.
Where public opinion at the beginning of the NATO attacks on Yugoslavia was about 60% supporting Clinton, and toward the end it was down to below 50% or around 50%.
U početku je javno mnjenje ogromnom većinom podržavalo agresiju protiv Jugoslavije, da bi na kraju podrška spala ispod 50% javnog mnjenja.
And the US leaders who have no regard for international law or human decency do have regard for public opinion polls and getting reelected. So sometimes there is some kind of impact we can have, although it's limited.
A određeni uticaj koji smo postigli to je da se američki lideri koji inače ne mare ni za međunarodni zakon itekako mare za mišljenje svog javnog mnjenja jer su to njihovi birači.
That's really all I have to say is namely that we hope to continue this struggle, to continue to try to wake up people. We came here not to educate you, but to educate ourselves so that we can be better equipped to go back to the belly of the beast and try to change things there as best we can. Thank you very much.
Zato smo mi rešeni da nastavimo sa našom borbom. Mi nismo ovde došli da vas obrazujemo i da prosvetljujemo, već smo došli sebe da obrazujemo i prosvetlimo kako bismo bili opremljeni za tu borbu u zemlji. So now, is there any questions for our guests? Please, Lisa.
Thank you. Well, I don't know if we're heroes, but we do pay a price. Can I make a point on that? In the United States, it's not that free. People who are critical of the established policy lose their jobs. I have a PhD from Yale University.
Tiče heroja, tu bih imala da dodam par reči. U Americi nije ni malo lako biti kritički nastrojen. Ljudi koji kritikuju gube posao. Ja imam doktorat, inače.
Sa Yale, da. Od 5 najboljih u Americi, u svetu.
And yet I was kicked out of my profession, and others of my persuasion, especially those of us who actively organize and do things like that, are often find we have difficulties. I'm surveilled by the FBI, who come visit me every so often to harass. This is free America, where there's the great American democracy, which is so free for a very limited people on the perspective there. And so, I don't know if I would use the word heroes, but we certainly do have to make certain sacrifices sometimes. At the same time, as our numbers increase, it's harder and harder to repress and isolate people. And I've often been told if I want to reach a wider and stronger audience, I should speak in a weaker and smaller voice, more conventional.
Da, i to što se tiče ratnih heroja, kako rekla gospođa Milentijević, mi nismo ratni heroji, ali smo i tekakve žrtve morali da podnesemo.
But I think when you censor yourself, you're doing the work of your enemies then, before they even have to lift a finger.
Govorili su mi ako bude malo ublažio stavove da ću imati širu publiku, ali jednostavno neke stvari ne.
And I do have faith that people will wake up and recognize their own interests, as some people do, and we are mobilizing. I'll leave it at that. That's all.
Da ima budućnosti to što oni rade, da će se ljudi osvestiti i da će se mobilisati sve veći broj ljudi istomišljenika.
I would just like one quick comment on that. I would disagree with one thing that Michael said, and that is that he should not be teaching people here about anything. I think Michael is the most important analyst of the American system in the whole world today. Really. I tricked you, didn't I?
specifičan američkog sistema.
And I had a conversation, just to sum up, I had a
a little more respect with my delegation now.
No. And I had a conversation with a Yugoslav, let's say, official at one time. And he was telling me about the many books he read about the American system, written by Americans.
I taj funkcioner mi je spomenuo mnoge knjige koje su sami Amerikanci napisali o američkom sistemu.
And I asked him, who is the best expert on America in Yugoslavia?
Pitao sam ga ko je najveći stručnjak za Ameriku u Jugoslaviji.
And the global world situation.
I globalnu svetsku situaciju.
And he said, we don't have one.
Mi nemamo takvog, odgovorio mi je.
Well, I would recommend Michael for that position.
No, you have your own.
But the point is simply this. The point is simply this, that you cannot rely on the mainstream American academic viewpoint of the world situation. And it's essential to develop your own perspective and find that through critical perspectives.
I am a reporter of RTV studio B. Nenad Marković, and I have an explanation for Michael Peretti. Member of my crew didn't take microphone because we don't like you. We have anything against you, but because he wants to torture me, wants for me to write as much as possible. And the question is there any possibility, according to American Constitution, American law, to start a trial against USA government for the crimes committed in Yugoslavia? And is it some kind of trial that Ramsey Clarks are trying to promote?
Yeah, well, I always remember when Bill Clinton was being impeached before. I was always for that impeachment, not because he was taking advantage of a young girl, a young woman, but because he was doing so much of that same thing to the whole country and the whole world.
Oh, you was for the impeachment. Right, you were for the impeachment.
No, I'm saying
Translate that you were against it.
No, I was for the impeachment.
Excuse me.
Right, because he was. There's a less delicate way. I don't know how to put it, but anyway, you know what I mean. He was doing terrible things to the whole nation and the world. It wasn't this particular incident. And right now, I think we do have a case, and there's this case that the chances of him actually getting impeached are very slight, because most of Congress supported him, and the courts wouldn't challenge the president at this level.
Uslovi za pokretanje slučaja su postojali, ali nažalost tu je bio Kongres I trebalo je dobiti njegovu saglasnost I podršku.
But he should be impeached for NAFTA, for GATT, for the MAI. He should be impeached for destroying our human service system in the U.S. He should be impeached for increasing military spending. He should be impeached for bombing Iraq and Somalia and for trying to destroy Yugoslavia. And he hasn't destroyed Yugoslavia, I'm happy to see.
Ali